How are you? Good on you, man. Great crowd y'all got. Well, she's back home today. I just, hey man, look at this. We got somebody with some Texas roots here. How are you? Where y'all from? Yes, sir. From Houston, okay. And Bobby, we're this way. Okay, we got it. Glad you're here. Thanks for gonna go back up this way. Ready? You go to work. I'm gonna say hi to you folks.
Governor, nice to meet you. Welcome to Clinton.
Nice to see you again. I mentioned
How are you?
Yes,
ma'am. Good to see you. Thanks for coming out again. Last time you were in Patriot, good Lord, probably about 6 months ago at least. Where are you from? Oh, get out of here. How old are you? 36. Okay. 66. Okay. Right, we used to play Goree, and y'all played 8-man ball. Yep. We played 6. We'd go play Goree every now and then. Had a kid named Charles Kidd.
Yes, we did. He was good, wasn't
he? He was very good. How are you? Good to see you. Y'all go ahead.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Bob House. I have the honor of being one of the statewide co-chairs for Governor Perry's campaign here in Iowa. I'll keep my remarks very short. I know you didn't come here to see or listen to me. And part of the great honor I have throughout this campaign not only is getting to know Governor Perry a little better, but it's to meet and get to know some of the other national leaders that are traveling with the governor as he crisscrosses the country and our state, and in an effort to lend their support to his effort to be our next president. One of those men is here with us today. He is a man of great accomplishment. He's had many roles. He is also, as governor of the state of Louisiana, he's also cut taxes on middle-class families. He's cut business taxes. He's made a very large priority of his administrations to spur job growth and business investment in his state. He and the governor, Governor Perry, have a very healthy competition, which I've been witnessing on the bus over the last couple days, in terms of who's going to get which business to move to their various states. And I think he can give a very unique perspective on what it's going to take, not only to turn our country around, to get an outsider into Washington, but also some very unique perspectives on his friend and his neighbor, Governor Rick Perry. So with that, I will turn it over to Governor Bobby Jindahl.
Thank you all very much. It is great to be in the great state of Iowa. We've got a piece of the Mississippi River in our state. The only difference is it's a little warmer where I am, and that river's a little muddier by the time it gets down. It's not as clear as it is up here. I want to thank y'all for allowing us to come be with you today. I understand this is warm for y'all. There's nobody in Louisiana who would call this warm, by the way. It's not as cold as we want it to get. You know, for me, it was pretty simple why I wanted to be here, to share with you why I'm supporting my friend Rick Perry to be the next president of these great United States of America. I was at a meeting with fellow governors, and somebody commented there that this may be the most important election in our lifetimes. You know, that gets said a lot. Every couple of years there's an election and somebody stands up and says, well, this election is really, really important. And especially if that person is running for office, because they think their election is really, really important. Well, I'm here to tell you, I really genuinely believe this is an important election for the future of our country. I'll start off with a couple of just claims about this great country. I truly believe in my bones that we are blessed to live in the greatest country in the history of the world. I don't know about you, but when my parents would tell me that as a young child, I kind of roll my eyes when they, I don't know about you, but my parents every day, they tell us the same things like, son, eat your vegetables. You know, they're starving children in China, you got to eat your vegetables. I'd always think, well, let's send them my vegetables. I don't want them to have them. Well, what does that do for me? My dad would always tell me, though, every single day, be grateful you were born in this country. You know, as a child, you don't understand what that means. You don't really have a choice. I mean, you don't understand what's different. And as you get older, and especially as you have your own children, you begin to understand what your parents are trying to teach you. I've got 3 great children at home, and their mom, they're 9, 7, and 5. My wife and I are getting ready for a great Christmas. That is a great age, by the way, because they still think mom and dad know something. And they're really not looking for anything really expensive for Christmas. My little 5-year-old boy, he plays with the boxes more than the toys. I told my wife, let's just get him boxes. Why are we bothering to buy the toys? Let's save some money. But you know, the greatest gift we can give those 3 children, it's not a toy we'll buy them for Christmas. The greatest gift we can give them is to leave for them the same opportunities, the same American dream that we've inherited from our parents. Every generation has left more opportunities for their children than we've inherited from our parents. We don't want to become the first generation that spends so much, borrows so much, that we mortgage our children's future. But if we're not careful, that's exactly what's going to happen in this great country. Already in Washington, D.C., they borrowed $15 trillion in our name. That's over $46,000 for every American. I was talking to a young mom. She showed me a baby she had adopted. She said this poor baby hadn't done anything. Not crawling, not walking, not talking, not doing anything. And Ordeo's $46,000. Hadn't done anything to anybody. And you think about it, 3 years in a row, deficit's over $1 trillion. You want to see where this election is about 2 very different visions for this great country of ours. It's not about who's the best debater. It's not about who can give you the best speech or who looks the best on TV. It's really about 2 very different views of this country. One that's in Washington, D.C. right now, that the Obama administration has embraced strongly, is a view that takes us the way of many European socialist democracies, with a much larger government that borrows and spends more money, that's much more involved in every facet of our lives. That's already taken over part of the banking sector, taken over part of the automotive sector, and now wants to take over part of the healthcare industry as well through Obamacare. And there's a different vision that involves more limited government. Rick Perry doesn't stand for that. He stands instead for a federal government that operates the way that our founding fathers intended. A smaller, more focused government that really is focused on those priorities that a federal government should be taken care of, but then allowing us to have the freedom to run our lives. And to me, it really comes down to 5 distinguishing characteristics. Number 1, Rick Perry has put out a specific plan to cut our taxes. Put out a plan to flatten and set those taxes at a 20% rate. Now, when you compare that to what's going on in Washington, D.C., it seems like every time you turn around, they want to raise our taxes. Raise taxes on families, on businesses. You know, it's pretty simple. If you want to encourage an activity, don't tax it. If you want to discourage an activity, tax it. I've yet to see any society tax their way into prosperity. And despite President Obama's best attempts, we're not going to be the first to disprove that. So on the first issue, Governor Perry has stood up strong to say that the answer to our economic challenges is not simply to raise more taxes, because let's be honest, in tough economic times, we've got to make one fundamental decision. Do we force the tough decisions to be made in government, or do we shift those burdens to families and businesses already struggling to pay their bills? In Texas, he's cut taxes. 65 times, $14 billion in tax cuts over there. Secondly, Governor Perry's put out a detailed plan to balance the federal government's budget, to cut spending. And he includes what we've got to do to improve our entitlement and strengthen our entitlement programs so that they'll be there for our children and grandchildren as well. President Obama continues to put out stimulus after stimulus bill, spending hundreds of billions of dollars, and yet the unemployment rate he promised, remember, pass his stimulus bill, we'd get below 8%. Hasn't happened. So what do? They want to come back with stimulus part 2, part 3, part 4. You know, what was it, Einstein, who said doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results was insanity? That's exactly what Washington, D.C. is doing. They want to spend more and more of our money without producing results. Governor Perry's produced a specific plan calling for a part-time Congress, a constitutional amendment to balance the budget, to say that the answer is not more government spending. Number 3. He understands that an over-regulating and overreaching central government is costing us jobs and opportunity. He's helped to lead the fight against Obamacare. He's helped to lead the fight with other governors against the EPA. And I can tell you just in my own state, we've seen companies make investment decisions, Shintech spending $120 million overseas instead of this country because of the EPA. Nucor delayed a $3.4 billion investment out of state, partly due to the uncertainty of the regulations coming out of Washington, D.C. Almost 10 new regulations every day. The SBA estimates those regulations cost manufacturers $10,000 per job. All we're doing is making it easier for these jobs to go overseas rather than stay in America. Rick has produced a detailed plan saying, Why don't we do something as simple as just a cost-benefit analysis on all these regulations? Why don't we put a moratorium until we figure out the real impact of some of these regulations? Fourth, Governor Perry understands the importance of producing our energy right here at home. To keep those dollars here at home, both to lower costs for manufacturers and consumers, but also as a matter of national security. He embraces an all-of-the-above strategy: oil, gas, biofuels, wind, solar, nuclear, clean coal, conservation, and maybe there may be forms of energy we can't even imagine today. But his point is, let's not politicize the decisions. For example, the Obama administration, we had a moratorium that basically sent rigs overseas to other countries. The Obama administration is now delaying a decision on the pipeline for political considerations. And the list goes on and on and on. Rick Perry's got a plan to create over 1 million jobs by allowing us to produce more of our energy at home, keep those billions of dollars right here in our economy, instead of sending to the countries that aren't always our friends. And fifth and finally, I've seen this up close, being his neighbor over in Louisiana. Rick Perry has got the executive experience we need in the White House. We're at a very important time for our country. We cannot afford any more on-the-job training. President Obama is a great speaker. Let's give him his due. He is probably one of the best speakers we've seen in politics in a generation. But he has not run anything. He basically hadn't run anything before he was elected President of the United States. In contrast, Rick Perry has been governor of the state of Texas for nearly 11 years. Under President Obama's watch, the country has lost nearly 2 million jobs. Under Rick Perry's governance, the state of Texas during that same time period gained almost 1 million jobs. Nearly 40% of the jobs created have been created in the state of Texas over these last couple of years. But I have seen firsthand the response what is required in times of disaster is executive experience, is crisis management. I saw after that oil spill, the federal government under the Obama administration seemed to be more worried about paperwork, forms, permission, and regulations. At one point, we had vacuum barges picking up the oil out of the water. The federal government didn't want to approve it, so we had the National Guard pilot the concept. Private sector started doing it. The federal government shut them down because they wanted to check the valves. Because they were worried. These were barges picking up thousands of gallons of oil collectively. They were worried they might be dropping a few drops back into the water. 24 hours later, they finally realized how absurd that was and said, we don't need to inspect them after all. Compare that to Hurricanes Gustav and Ike. Hurricanes coming into the state of Louisiana, we were doing the largest evacuation in our country's history. We had to get patients out of harm's way. The federal government promised ambulances, they didn't arrive in time. Saturday night, with hours to go before the airspace was going to close on Sunday, I called my friend, my neighbor, Governor Rick Perry. I said, people's lives are literally on the line. We've got to get them out of harm's way. The very first planes to arrive the next day were planes from the Texas Air National Guard. He didn't ask me, do you have FEMA permission? He didn't say, fax me over a piece of paper releasing me from liability. He said, Bobby, whatever you need, you'll have. And we eventually got planes from the Northern Command in Canada, and the last flight took off literally as they were closing the airspace. But the first planes came from the state of Texas. Now I can tell you a whole lot more, but I'm going to close with this. This election is not just about us. This election is about our children and grandchildren. I still believe our best days are ahead of us. I believe this next century belongs to America, not China. I don't believe those pessimists that tell you, oh, we can't compete anymore, or the good old days are behind us. But I do believe leaving behind those opportunities for our children will require a conservative leader in Washington, D.C. It will require an outsider in Washington, D.C. It will require us to send somebody like Rick Perry to be our next president. So I want to thank you for coming out today. Please give a great Iowa welcome to Governor and the next President of the United States, Rick Perry.
Thank you all. Bobby Jindahl. Let me tell you, that's the kind of neighbor you want to have.
What are you going to say now?
I can take questions now. That was awesome, Bobby. Thank you. He's the kind of neighbor that makes sure you keep your grass cut, that you keep your yard looking good, because that's the type of competition that our founding fathers, as they envisioned this country, that they were willing to put their reputations, their treasure, even their lives on the line for. And as we talk about our founding fathers and that constitution of our country that they developed, and as they wrote it, and really thinking back about the reasons about why we have a Constitution that has a very narrowly defined function for the federal government, was because they were living in a time that this faraway, all-powerful King George was putting some rather heavy restrictions on them and high taxation, and they were having very little to say about their lives, and they were willing to, in that sense, literally put their lives on the line. And that Constitution, as they wrote it, and as they had those Bill of Rights that were added, and the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, talks about the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to it by the states, are reserved for the states, respectively, or to the people. And the simplicity and the elegance of that 10th Amendment is what Bobby and I truly respect, and as most governors across this country do, is that we compete against each other. And I think, I'm not sure our founding fathers, even in their most extreme vision, would have seen 50 of these laboratories of innovation, but they understood the concept very well, that the federal government was supposed to do a few things very well, like stand the military, secure and defend our borders. It'd be good if they did some of the things that they actually are supposed to do in the Constitution. But what we've found ourselves over the last 100 years, really, we've seen government growing ever bigger. As a crisis might hit, then government's response is, well, let's pass some more legislation. Let's pass this law and let's do these things, or we'll consolidate even more power into Washington, because that's the way to keep these things from ever happening again. And as that government got bigger and bigger, our liberties got smaller and smaller. And we find ourselves today with Americans really concerned not only about the liberties that have been taken away. For instance, the idea that there is a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. that's making decisions about how your children or your grandchildren are being educated in Iowa is really a bit foreign to me. There is nothing in our Constitution that gives Washington the authority to be delegating responsibilities or monies or policies back to the states. Congress has just taken it upon themselves to create these agencies of government. And Americans are really concerned about the economic situation we find ourselves in. And as you find out more and more about how this economic disaster came about, you're going to be more and more frustrated and upset, and you know you've been taken advantage of. You're just not sure who did it yet. But it's going to become abundantly clear that it's the members of Congress, it is lobbyists, it is Wall Streeters, and those individuals together over the last 10 or 15 years put together a scheme. And the greatest theft that has occurred in the history of our country has occurred, and Main Street is going to be forced to pay for it. And that, I will suggest to you, is the reason that we need an outsider to come into Washington, D.C. A person who's been fighting the federal government now as the governor of the second largest state for the last 11 years. A governor who has been having to deal with the government's failure to secure the border with Mexico for the last 11 years. Pleading with them to allow the resources to come to that border, the boots on the ground, the strategic fencing, the aviation assets that have to be in place, I would suggest, so that we can secure that border. And let me just kind of take an aside here on that issue and share with you why that's so important. And it's not just about the issue of illegal individuals coming into our country. Yes, that is of great concern, and it should be. But what is becoming abundantly clear is that terrorist organizations are using Mexico as a base of operation. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranians, less than 60 days ago, were identified as being in negotiations with the Zeta cartels to run an operation penetrating through our southern border into U.S. soil to assassinate a diplomat. We have international concerns with Venezuela having the largest Iranian embassy in the world in their country. You have a Marxist leader of Bolivia that's shored up by Hugo Chavez. I mean, I share with people, I think it's time for us to have a new Monroe Doctrine instituted in the Western Hemisphere. Not unlike in the 1820s, when there was some real concern about foreign interest coming in and trying to impact the United States from these countries in the Western Hemisphere. I can promise you the Brazilians and the Colombians really want us to have a more active engagement into South America and Central America than what they're seeing from us today, because they're really concerned about these countries that are trying to influence South and Central America, and obviously using our southern border as the way to penetrate into this country. I've made the pledge that within 12 months of being sworn in as the President of the United States, that border will be secure. It will be shut down. We will have the boots on the ground and the aviation assets that are identifying everything that's going on that border, and then we can have a conversation and an appropriate time about how to deal with the individuals that are in this country illegally and how to deal with them, but not until that border is secure. And that has to happen. Now, I'm fine, Bobby. I think I got it here for a little bit. Thank you. But as we go on and as we talk about this competition between the states, I think that's what our founding fathers saw. That's what they expected. They wanted to see laboratories of innovation. This is one of the brightest, most capable governors in America. He's run their health and human services agencies in Louisiana. He's been a member of Congress. I mean, he's got such a broad background. The health care programs that he will put in place, the education programs that he puts in place, the economic development programs that he puts in place, they are laboratories of which I watch closely. Other governors watch closely. They see what we do in the state of Texas and how we have created the most successful job creation state in America. They look at those different programs. They look at our tax structure. They look at our regulatory climate. They look at what we've done on the legal side of things to protect against frivolous lawsuits. And those are challenges for these other states. And a president that respects the 10th Amendment, a president that understands Washington, D.C. should be substantially less consequential in your life than it is today. And that is one of my pledges, to try to make Washington, D.C. as inconsequential in your life as I can. Whether it's the tax policies that Bobby talked about, whether it's pulling all of those regulations back in, whether it's getting our energy independence back to domestic energy. I mean, the idea that we're having a conversation today in Washington, D.C. about this XL Keystone Pipeline is beyond me. I mean, It's been studied for 3 years. Now, I know why this is happening. Our president is driven more by politics than he is the well-being of the American citizen. And I say that with, I'm frustrated that I say it, but it's true. Why would you have a source of oil for the United States that's going to go one of two ways? The Canadians are our good friends, our ally, and our neighbor, but they're not going to leave that oil in the ground. It's going to go either west to China or it's going to go south for United States consumption. And that pipeline has to be built for it to be brought into the United States. It's been studied 3 years. It's one of the safest pipelines that may have ever been built in the history of the country. That part of the world has pipelines going across it that I will suggest to you are not as safe as the ones that they're going to build. The jobs that will be created just in the construction of that pipeline is in the tens of thousands. I would suggest with it built and the refinery and the total amount of jobs will go over 1 million in just that project of bringing that all in. And every barrel of oil that comes from there is one less barrel of oil that we have to buy from countries that in some cases do not have our best interest in mind. This ought to be a no-brainer for the President of the United States. But it's in contention now because he's more interested in keeping his base satisfied to win an election than he is in getting Americans to work. I'm interested in getting Americans to work because that is the single most important thing that we do for the future of this country. It's how we pay off the $15 trillion of debt. You open these federal lands, I think only 8% of our federal proven reserves are being produced today on federal lands and waters. Let those dollars that are coming in from the exploration of the gas and the oil and other resources that we have on federal lands and waters go to pay down this $15 trillion debt. And the job creation that will occur in this country when entrepreneurs know that they're not going to be overtaxed and overregulated, they will go risk their capital. They will expand their business. They will hire people that will in turn create wealth. Companies will come back into the United States because they know they're not going to be overregulated. I suggest that they didn't leave to begin with because, or I should say solely because they could find cheap labor somewhere else. They left because they were being overregulated. Just this year, the chief executive officer of Coca-Cola made the statement that it is easier to do business in communist China than it is in the United States because of the regulatory climate. What more do we need to understand that we have allowed Washington, D.C. to become this all-powerful, almost all-consuming place that thinks they know best how you should live your life, how you should run your business. Young people who are working their way towards high school graduation, the biggest day of their life to that point in time is going to be their high school graduation. And we've got federal courts that tell them when and how and why they can say a prayer or have an invocation at their high school graduation. That's what we've come to in this country. This country that I argue and argue strongly was founded by individuals that understand that Providence had a great deal to do with the formation of this country. You go back and read the writings of many of our founding fathers. And they were very faithful, and they understand the importance of an Almighty, and they understood the importance to pray into that Almighty. Yet we've got constitutional prohibitions today. One of my promises to people And the next President of the United States will probably put at least 2, maybe 3 individuals on our United States Supreme Court. They will be strict constructionists, and they will understand clearly that when it says freedom of religion, that's what it means, not freedom from religion. So here's what I want to wrap up with, and I'm going to sit over here in this chair a second and take your questions. I want to make a little pact with you and say thank you for coming out on a kind of cool and breezy Iowa.
It's nice.
I didn't even wear a coat.
I know it. Cold and breezy for Bobby and myself. I told somebody, I said, when you're in Iowa in mid-December, you have a purpose. That's kind of like when you're in New Orleans or in Houston in August, you have a purpose. So we've each got our weather to deal with. But I just want to share this with you. If you all will have my back on January the 3rd at the caucuses, I'll have your back in Washington, D.C. for the next 4 years. God bless you. I'm going to sit here on this little stool, and if you have a question for Bobby, I'll hand the mic over to him, and so just have at it. Yes, sir.
There are 11 million what we call illegal immigrants in this country. What is your plan to handle them that are already here and have been paying taxes and are residents?
His question was about the 11 million or whatever the number is, individuals who are here illegally. And again, I want to go back to the importance of, we have to deal with these issues as governors because of the failure of the federal government to address this issue for many years. This didn't happen just in the last 3 years, but we've seen the president, who I think has a seeming disregard for securing the border. As a matter of fact, this last spring, I believe it was, he came to El Paso and made the statement that the border was safer than it had ever been.
Did he have his bodyguards?
I told him, I said, I thought maybe he was talking about the Canadian border. But he was, I mean, I really don't know what the issue is with this administration relative to securing the border. It becomes more dangerous. We put some $400 million of Texas taxpayer money, constituted Texas Ranger recon teams. We put substantial law enforcement, state law enforcement, Parks and Wildlife wardens on the rivers, on the lakes, to try to control surge in. So securing the border is a must, and we know how to do it with the strategic fencing, the aviation assets, and the boots on the ground. Once that's done, then I will suggest to you enforcing the laws that are on the books today will go a long way towards, I mean, we have an administration today that if an individual is stopped and they are here illegally, unless they have committed a violent crime, they're turned loose back into the general population. And I would suggest to you direct conflict with laws that are on the book, and if we would enforce the laws that are on the books, individuals who are stopped, individuals who are apprehended, and they are in this country illegally, the deportation process starts. But even if, I think the message is, they're actually starting to enforce the laws that are on the books, then a substantial number of individuals go back to where they're from. And at that particular point in time, then you can have a legitimate conversation about how to deal with the ones that are left here. Yes, ma'am.
A lot of the reason I see that our the controls went out of the people's hands and into the government's hands because of lobbyists. What are you going to do with the lobbyists?
Well, one of the things that Bobby mentioned that I didn't reiterate, but I want to here, is that having a part-time Congress will address a lot of those issues. And let me share with you why. In my home state, Bobby's home state, we have a part-time legislature. We're the 13th largest economy in the world. Texas is not an unconsequential size and budget. Our legislature meets for 140 days every other year. Our legislators are paid $600 a month. We have a balanced budget amendment to our Constitution. We don't have earmarks. We have a very different system in place in Austin, Texas than what they do in Washington, D.C. They're full-time. Congress, that's how they make their living. They are members of Congress. They are prohibited from having a job back home. I would suggest to you, you substantially cut their salaries, you cut their staffs, you cut the amount of time that they're allowed to be in town to take care of the business. I think it makes probably sense to have a 2-year budgeting process. I mean, they hadn't passed a budget in I don't know how long. So have a 2-year budgeting process. And at that particular point, obviously prohibit earmarks, and we're going to have to pass, we, the citizens of this country, are going to have to pass a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution. At the same time we're doing that, we ought to consider the part-time Congress. And at that particular time, your lobbyist becomes substantially less influential, partly because you're not going to have members of the legislature that stay around that much. It's also, my instinct is it's a bit of a way to limit the amount of time that people go and serve, because I think we're somewhere around 6 or 7 years average in Texas is how much time the average person spends in the legislature. So you have a type of term limit installed with that process as well. So again, it makes Washington less powerful, and I'm a big believer that everything that we can do to make Washington less powerful and empower the people more in this country, the better off this country will be. Yes, ma'am.
Could you discuss your 20%
20% tax.
Is that a flat tax?
You won't have to help me on this time. But I had to get Bobby to help me last time. We were getting so far in the weeds on it. A lady who had been doing taxes for about 60 years, and she knew her business very well. But let me just kind of take you through it. Let me take you through it. The plan that we have is a 20% flat tax. Your personal deductions are still there. I think we move them up to $12,500 per dependent, up to $50,000, or I think above $50,000, and the deductions are for mortgage interest, for your charitable giving, for your local taxes. Do away with the dividends tax, do away with the capital gains tax, do away with the tax on Social Security benefits. Take 20% of that, put it on that postcard, mail it in.
With a check.
Yes, well, yes, sir, probably. That would be good. I mean, even Timothy Geithner will be able to get his taxes with this simple form. And on the corporate side, it's just a flat, straight 20% corporate tax rate. Do away with all the loopholes that are there, the corporate loopholes. You know, the idea that a GE makes the profits that they make, yet they don't pay any taxes to the federal government is just, I think, abhorrent to most of us. And find simplicity and fairness in the tax structure, and that program, and the rest of the details of it, there's some more details that I would direct you just to go to rickperry.org, and we've got the 3 plans on there. One is on the energy and job side. The second one is the tax, the spending, how to get the balanced budget. Matter of fact, we're the only person on the stage that on the debate stage that has a plan to have our budget balanced by 2020 and capped at 18% of gross domestic product. I think you earlier said it's about 24% of gross domestic product is what we're spending right now. I mean, a huge amount compared to historic levels. rickperry.org. Yes, sir.
I'm a member of the local city council.
Yes, sir.
One thing we have
Thanks for your service.
Thank you. One of the things we have to wrestle with that infuriates me, frankly, are state and federal mandates that are unfunded mandates.
Yes, sir. Well, you should.
And my constituents will complain about their level of taxation, and so much of it is out of our control.
His question is, how do you deal with unfunded mandates at the federal and at the state level? As a matter of fact, this last session of the legislature, because it's something that state lawmakers and governors should be very cognizant of as well. Someone comes up with a good idea, it looks good on paper, it sounds good, there's a special interest group that's pushing it through, and the next thing you know, you as a city councilman or a county supervisor, they look at that and they go,
it's going to cost us a ton.
We're fixing to have to raise taxes to do what they are mandating us to do from Des Moines. I took I think a sheriff, independent school district superintendent, county commissioners, some individuals from the local government, a mayor, city councilman, city council women, some individuals at city and local. And I said, I want you to look at all of the unfunded mandates that are out there and report back to us so that we can remove as many of those as we can. Because the fact of the matter is, even though it may look and sound like a good idea, the cost needs to be justifiable for the benefit. And that's what we want to do with all these federal regulations. I will suggest to you that the tax burden needs to be lowered, but the real cost to Americans are the embedded cost of these regulations. Now, I'll give you, some of you, everybody's involved with agriculture because you eat, but some of you are directly involved in agriculture because you either are in the implement business or you're actually farmers or ranchers, or you have an allied industry that supplies something to them. And the EPA cost, well, I won't just pick on the EPA, but they're the easiest one to pick on because there's been so many regulations out that frankly are so costly. John Deere has a new engine that is being mandated, by EPA to reduce the nitrogen oxide level, the emission, that I will suggest to you will make little, if no, impact on the guys got to go, guys got to go.
Those are my grandkids.
I understand. But that engine's going to add $20,000 to that specific John Deere tractor. It's going to be passed on to the farmers. And the regulatory, I mean, Bobby and I could sit here for probably until dark 30 and share with you regulatory costs that the federal government, you said 10 regulations a day come, I mean, on the average, 10 new regulations a day come out of Washington, D.C. And I'm reminded of this grand theft that occurred on Wall Street with us bailing these banks out. We have the regulators. I mean, there's buildings full of regulators and overseers and investigators, but they weren't doing their job. And we don't need more regulations. We need a government, frankly, we need substantially less regulations, whether it's in the banking industry or whether it's in the environmental side of things. What we need to have is efficient regulations and efficient regulators. That's what needs to occur. And men and women that come to work with me aren't going to be worried about the next job that they have, or that they're going to leave government and go be a lobbyist and make a bunch of money. They're going to come with the expectation that they're going to be philosophically in tune with my desire to make Washington as inconsequential in your life as we can make it. That means that when lobbyists or members of Congress and an industry sector is trying to get special treatment, that they get told no. That if an earmark comes to my desk on an appropriations bill, that bill is going to get vetoed. I mean, and I'm going to tell them up front, don't send an earmark. They're going to be done with. Over. Gone. Yes, sir.
When you're elected, what will you do with Obamacare? Where do you start? And
His question is about what do you do with Obamacare? Day one, I'll use the executive order privilege that a president has to wipe out as much of it as you can with executive orders, and by the time the election is over until inaugural day, we'll be working on legislation to introduce that day to completely wipe Obamacare off the books, and then put into place programs that will actually work. Sending governor like Governor Jindahl Medicaid dollars that are block granted back to his state, that he knows how to better deliver more efficiently, more effectively, and certainly with substantial cost savings. Yes, sir.
Just make sure they read it before they pass it.
Yes, sir. You know, and I get it about, you know, the idea that you've got to have 4,000 pages is rather. I mean, I also understand you're not going to, you know, every bill is going to be 4 pages or less. I heard that one time, and I know that may be a little unrealistic. But the simplicity, if you can simplify the tax code in this country to that flat tax that we're talking about, and stop the special interest from being there, putting their imprint on every piece of legislation, they need to understand that I will veto bills. And you know, if they need to test me a time or two, then God bless them, because I'm going to be there for you. As I said in my remarks, I'm fixing to give this back to Bob, but this election is not about me. It was never my purpose in life to be the President of the United States. My dad was an old B-17 tail gunner in 1944.
You flew too.
Yes, sir. My dad taught me about giving back to my country, serving, do your duty. I've had the great privilege for 25 years to serve my state. And our country is in trouble today. I've been called to do my duty again. That's what this election is about. You, your children, your grandchildren, and a president that understands that the glory of America is encapsulated in our Founding Fathers' vision. It's in the values that they understood were very important for this country. And it is in the heart and soul
of the small businessman and woman who really drives the economy, and to free them from overtaxation and overregulation. And if we will do that, America not only will be great again, but America will be America again. God bless you.
Thank you, everyone, for leaving. I just want to remind you, on your way out the door and down the steps, please look for one of the members of our staff. The governor just told you he is clearly stepping up to do his duty. We'd also like you to do your duty as well. On January 3rd, please go to the caucuses. Please vote for Rick Perry. Any one of our staff, as you exit the room here, we'll take your name and we'll get you any additional information you need, but we need your help. Again, thanks for coming out today, and we look forward to
Oh, did you get some pictures? You're getting some now?
Yeah.
And we tell you that they're